of Long Island, also sometimes known as the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, but I don't expect you to know that, so don't freak out. Battle of Long Island is the first major battle after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we're just using it as a rule of thumb, whether you go July 2nd or July 4th. July 4th, 1776 is when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And then a month later, basically, you have the Battle of Long Island. This is a very strategic battle. If the British gain control of the New York harbor, they will gain control of course, any goods that were coming in and out of that harbor that the colonists needed, but it will also allow the British to set up naval areas and patrol that area. It will help the British cut the colonists off, the New England colonists, from the middle colonies. So what the British are really trying to do is gain control of important waterways and separate the colonies so that they can't work as well together. So William Howe, you'll hear his name a few different times, is going to be the main British general at this time. And of course, the colonial troops are going to be led by George Washington. Just strictly looking at those numbers, you can see that the colonists are going to be outnumbered. Now, this is going to be a multi-day, multi-week battle. And what ends up happening is what typically has plagued the colonists since the beginning of the war. They don't have as much ammunition. Remember, we used to get a lot of our trade goods and our supplies from Great Britain. Well, Great Britain's not going to supply you with guns anymore because you're at war. So the Patriots are running low on supplies, and a lot of what they're doing is retreating, constantly retreating. That's the colonists are retreating from the British, and eventually they will lose Long Island. This is a very major loss for the colonists. Before this, they had been pretty successful. Lexington conquered, that was a success for them, or at least a draw. Battle of Bunker Hill, not bad. George Washington was able to maintain control at Boston, at the siege of Boston, and so they were successful at the very beginning, but now this is a huge loss. Just imagine losing New York City today. It's a very big loss, even today as it was then. So Battle of Long Island is a colonial fail. Person that comes out of this, since this is a multi-week battle and there's like a lot of strategy going on and a lot of back and forth, meaning troops retreating and then taking land, retreating, you have Nathan Hale that rises to fame during this battle. He has been fighting since July 1st, 1775. So not long after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he joins up. He has 5 brothers. They're all involved in the American Revolutionary War. George Washington is looking for volunteers. He needs a volunteer to go into / behind enemy lines and find out what's the troop movement. What are they going to do? What's the plan? So he can be ready for them. Nathan Hale volunteers. Now, originally, before the war broke out, he was a school teacher to begin with. So he goes in dressed as a Dutch schoolmaster. And really that means is he's just walking around Manhattan under the disguise and under the premise of that he's a Dutch school teacher looking for a job. He is able to gain information, spends about a week there gathering information, but he is found out. Some say that he had a cousin who was actually in the British Army who turned him in as a spy. So he has incriminating papers on him, and I think the story is that he had papers in the side of in his heel of his shoe. So either way, he's found out. There are papers on him. He is scheduled to be hanged the next day. And yes, I realize it should be hanged, not hung. Of course, for any hanging, they always ask, do you have any last words? And his famous last words are apparently, I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country. So in other words, he's saying, I would do this again and proudly because I want to do this for my country. Meanwhile, most of us would probably be crying. So he's that famous guy that comes out of the Battle of Long Island. So the important part here is Patriots are losing recruits. Most of the recruits, colonial troops that are sign up for a year. In the winter, at the end of December, that year is up. A lot of these guys are going to head home. George Washington has to make a pretty drastic move. And he's going to do that during the Battle of Trenton and Princeton. I've mentioned this before, but if you notice, even during the American Civil War, many of the battles do not take place in the dead of winter. Not a lot of November, December, January, February battles. Spring, summer, fall are when most of the battles take place. It's just harder to move thousands of troops through snow, through icy conditions, and a lot of times they set up encampments during the winter and do some drilling and strategizing That's what typically happens in winter. So nobody's really expecting George Washington to attack New Jersey, Trenton, and Princeton um, in in the winter. And in particular, they're not expecting it on Christmas night. So George Washington has a bold plan. He knows he's going to lose his troops. January 1st, they're gone. So he, number one, promises them, if you stay an extra 6 weeks, I'll pay you an extra $10. A lot of people stay for that. But he decides he needs to act, and he needs to act fast. So he leads his troops across the Delaware River, and that's where you see the famous paintings. You go back to this one, like this is supposed to be the famous painting of George Washington crossing the icy Delaware River. I actually don't think it was that ice clogged, nor probably with George Washington actually standing in the middle of the boat, because it's a pretty shallow boat, pretty dangerous. Anyways, going back to this, George Washington is able to use the element of surprise. The first group he comes on is the Hessians. These are German mercenaries, and I've mentioned like the legend of Sleepy Hollow, how the headless horseman is a Hessian or a German mercenary, just to give you some form of context. So what ends up happening is most of the Germans are celebrating. It's Christmas. They're drinking. They're playing cards. They're passed out. Whatever they're doing. And so they're not expecting him to come in the dark of night. So he does come. He is able to use the element of surprise, and he basically is able to capture the entire force and take control of Trenton. A couple days later, he retreats back across the Delaware River to Philadelphia. And then again, I believe it was on January 3rd, he crosses the Delaware River again at night and takes Princeton, New Jersey. He has to do a lot of this at night and a lot of his movements at night because there are various regiments of British soldiers throughout the area. So he's always trying to skirt different areas or different regiments in order to take these strategic places. So the biggest thing about this is a famous battle. This is a huge victory, and it's a huge victory mainly because the casualties for the American colonists are so low, and it just allows everybody to have a lot of spirit and hope that we can do this. Because after the Battle of Long Island, things were not looking very positive for them. And then we'll go into the Britain's three-prong attack.